My name's Imani McCray. I'm an ECU alumni, and welcome to my exhibition, Be the Change, Actions and Reactions. I actually never wanted to do photography. I always knew I wanted to be an artist, but I've avoided photography. And then it wasn't until I went to ECU, and they have this amazing abroad program run by Linda Doherty, where I ended up studying photography in Italy, and it just grabbed my attention. Everything that they were teaching about it, and I was able to use art in a new way that I wasn't before. It allowed me to go from analog to digital, which has a completely different effect. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. Grew up off and on in New York, and a little bit of time and adopted to Minnesota with my adopted family. But actually my biological mother lives here in North Carolina. So when I decided I wanted to go to university and sort some stuff out in my life, I was like, I would love to be able to spend this time with her and also, get to see what her life is like here, and ECU was the university, so that's how I ended up in North Carolina. Well, I was in university at the time. I started taking photography classes once I got back to ECU from the abroad program, so I wanted to further my education in photography, and I didn't really have a subject matter that I wanted to do, and I didn't know where my focus was, but I knew I wanted to advocate. Throughout my life, I've always been an advocate, whether it was my time in the military, whether it was my time in Minnesota helping organize for Black Lives Matter, whether it was just trying to defend the little guy. Advocacy has I lived in India actually for a month volunteering, so advocacy has always been what I wanted to do. What made me cover these genres is the fact that they were the most accessible to me, but I hope that doesn't limit me because I want to cover every genre possible. I have a long life to live, and I would like to be able to use my camera to advocate for everyone around the globe. These images are here right now, and they're getting in front of the faces of North Carolina and the East Coast of America, and there are so many subjects that I want them to be able to give input on and know about, and if they want to advocate for it as well. So yeah, my genre is based off of reactions of what's going on within the world and society. So yeah, that's why it's kind of everywhere. It's always going to be everywhere. It's going to be whatever is most relevant at that time and needs to be advocated for and brought to the forefront. I think being pigeonholed is very suffocating. And what I want people to see from my work is, even though this is a photojournalism exhibition, I'm not just a photojournalist. I consider myself an artist all around. I consider myself an advocate all around. And no matter what their job is, no matter what their day-to-day is, I want people to know that this doesn't have to be your 24/7. You can advocate any way that works for you, however your life allows you to accommodate. We all have unique stories, unique perspectives, gone through unique trials in life. I think people really need to listen to themselves and figure out how they can help if they want to. If these images touch them and inspire them and make them feel something, what skill sets and what unique perspective can their life bring to help for a more positive equation? So this image of Mason in Times Square when it's completely empty is probably one of my personal favorite images. As someone that has grown up in New York before, I've never seen Times Square like it was. The chances of me getting this image was unreal, and I really have to say that I'm grateful to the higher powers, the universe, anything that allowed me to be able to get this image. I was working for World Central Kitchen at the time of COVID in New York City, and that's when New York got completely shut down. No one was allowed to leave unless you were an essential worker. Nurses had to come from all over the country to New York because there was so much death happening. People needed food, the morgues were overrun. There was literally, you could go by a hospital, look at the back, and you just saw bodies piled up. So while I was working for World Central Kitchen, I got up really early one day before my shift. I think it was like 5 a.m., drove down to Times Square, and I saw these nurses all coming out of their hotels, getting on their buses to go to the hospital to start their morning shift. And I was like, hey, does anybody have a few minutes? I would love to just ask you some questions about what you're doing and maybe be able to document this process, because what you're doing is really unreal, and without you, where would we be? So these three nurses were very kind. They volunteered. Stephanie, Mason, Brian, of the a Texas hospital. So we just we walked from their hotel, which was a few blocks away from Times Square. No one was there, and they just let me do my thing, and they did their thing. They actually already had signs ready and things that they wanted to show and share with future generations. So the fact that they allowed me to capture that moment for them, and now that it's part of this exhibition, means the world to me, and I hope I can share it with them. I've been reaching out to their hospital, so stay tuned to see if we can do a follow-up with them of how they've been from the time that COVID happened and now. This image is from Occupy City Hall, specifically on the Brooklyn Bridge. Occupy City Hall was a movement by New York residents that wanted to demilitarize the police and also invest in communities. This isn't saying get rid of the police, but just make sure they're not so aggressive for people trying to have everyday life essentials that they needed. This protest went for 75 days, where people actually camped outside of City Hall in New York, formed this entire community where people were bringing food, they had first aid, they were doing educational lessons, community lessons, a lot of different strategies. It was one of the most beautiful things I saw in a very long time. This image specifically was such a crazy day because they had the permission from the police were working in tandem at times to help facilitate how certain protests went, to make sure they were as nonviolent as possible. And this day they had blocked off the bridge so they could do their protest, but they didn't know the police were planning on arresting everybody anyway. So they're out on the bridge, the police start coming in force to arrest them, and they already think they have permission and they don't. Turns out media and press didn't have permission either, even though that was within our rights, and I ended up getting arrested this day too. So this image is really special for me because when I got arrested, I had to hand off my camera. And when I handed off my camera, I handed it to someone I thought was an advocate for what they were doing, but they ended up being an undercover cop. And they deleted all my images. So I spent the day in jail, and then I got out of jail, and I looked for them, and I found them, and they gave me my camera back, and I'm going through my images, and I knew specifically I had this image, and it was gone. I was so heartbroken. So I'm going through, couldn't figure it out. But luckily, some of my professors at ECU had taught me that if your images are deleted, there's a way that you can code them long as nothing else is on there right away. So I was able to save this image and actually this entire section of the series of Occupy City Hall, which was trying to be repressed by police presence, which is funny because it's about demilitarization of the police. January 6th insurrection. This image, again, I feel like with all my images, they're images that I had to be very fortunate to be able to get, because I don't think they can be recreated through history, especially this day. I had no intention of being in Washington, D.C. for the January 6th insurrection. I had actually taken the Greyhound bus from Greenville, North Carolina, to New York, because this was the year that they shut down Times Square and no one was allowed to be in Times Square for New Year's Eve except for press. And I really wanted to document that. So that happened, New Year's Eve happened, and now we're in a brand new year, January. And there's all this buzz about January 6th and what's happening in the Capitol. And I'm like, okay, cool. What do? Do I go back to Greenville and get ready for the new semester that's coming up? Or do I take the Greyhound, stop off in DC for a few days and see what happens? And I was like, you're passing it anyway, you have to. So I stopped in DC for a few days. Everyone's buzzing about what might happen, the potential. And I go down to Black Lives Matter Plaza January 6th, where I'm gonna start. I get off the train, and as soon as I get off, there's a sea of people, American flags, Trump supporters from every way, just everywhere, millions of people. It was wild. So I'm just following the flow of the crowd at that point, and everyone's pushing towards, it feels like almost like a river, pushing you towards one way. And as they're pushing us, we're getting closer and closer to the Capitol. So as I'm getting closer to the Capitol, I'm documenting, and there's this giant scaffold up here. And it's actually gonna be the scaffold that's in this image that I see in the middle. And I'm like, okay, I need to get to the top of that. So I climb to the very top of it in the center, and that's when the smoke bombs are going off, and I have like tear gas in my eyes, and I'm just trying to shoot, and I somehow managed to get this image like tearing up. So I grabbed the image. I didn't even know I had it at that time. And then I get down and I continue through. It wasn't until I think maybe the next day or the day after where I'm like siphoning through the images for the newspaper, like, okay, what do I have? What can I send them? And I see this and I'm like, thank you. I don't know how to explain it. It feels like this is where I was meant to be, and I'm really honored I was able to capture this moment, because even though it is a day that has so much agitation around it, it's history. And I want to be there to document history, good, bad, however people perceive it. I want them to be able to have that chance to remember it, and actually us have a conversation about how we got here, and not to forget, so we don't repeat the same mistakes or we don't repeat the same traumas. So my goal is to make Be the Change an annual series. The way this one was Be the Change Actions and Reactions, the next one that I'm actively working on right now is Be the Change Power and Influencers. And that's going to talk about how power and influencers have the ability to use our platform for global philanthropy and the betterment of everybody's lives. So that's going to be me talking to people that have influence over all different platforms, from professional sports teams, NFL, NBA, politics, advocating and volunteering in danger zones or wherever immediate conflict happens. That includes Turkey and Syria. So I'm working on right now how to get over there to make sure I can aid through the damage of the earthquake, but also document this so we can know, people can know that aren't there, the real damage that's going on to those people. So many people have lost their lives, lost their homes, lost their history. And I would like to at least be able to give them a little bit of solace, knowing that they're not forgotten. Power and Influencers is also just going to cover the globe. It's not just America, it's not just Europe, it's wherever there is a problem, wherever there is power, wherever there is influence, bringing that to the mainstream, making sure that I'm boots on the ground and able to bring a global issue to the local community.